as the lead clinical safety coordinator for the clinical safety surveillance staff in the Office of Generic Drugs. She has 12 years of broad experience in the coordination and management of activities regarding the safety and surveillance of generic drug products. She has been at the FDA since 1995 and has held many various great roles. So welcome, Debra. And with that, we'll get started. Our first question is going to be for Dr. Chazin. Dr. Chazin, what actions is the agency taking on the usage of auto-injectors with PFS that are approved under separate pathways to address reported safety outcomes?
Hi, well, thank you for the question. This is a relatively new issue that we've discovered lately with the Copaxone example I gave, where on one side we have the drug in a prefilled syringe being approved, and separately we have an injector device being approved in a different center, and they're allowed to be done this way by the regulations. We don't foresee, however, when multiple versions of these are on the market at the same time, that this safety issue is occurring. So we are talking with our colleagues over at CDRH to let them become more aware of this happening and having internal meetings and coming up with plans to see, if this is just an isolated incident or if there's a broader, cross communication we could have to, sort of just proactively attend to this kind of issue.
Great, thank you so much. We have another question for you, Dr. Chazin. What options do you pursue when post-marketing safety issues arise, for example, delivery system drug incompatibility after both were approved separately?
Again, I think what's happened is as drugs have become more complex and the generic products have been approved and marketed, we are only recently seeing that these differences that are between a brand and a generic or between different generics are bringing us some information, post-marketing safety reports of device malfunctions. It's not that patients are not, appreciating the inhaler or injector. It's just that they are reporting now device malfunctions more than and that's a major complaint. So again, we are trying to open channels of conversation across CDER and CDRH to build awareness that this is occurring in our databases and try to address these combination product issues.
Thank you, Dr. Chazin. And with that, we have a few questions for Dr. Forsyth. So our first question is, if a bioequivalence study is conducted outside of the USA, will the SAE still need to be submitted to FDA?
No. If a bioequivalence study is conducted outside the United States, SAEs do not need to be submitted to FDA in an expedited 7 or 15-day manner. However, all adverse events must be submitted to the agency when the ANDA is submitted. So only serious adverse events from studies conducted in the United States must be submitted to FDA. And information on adverse events from foreign clinical studies that must be included in the ANDA can be found under 21 CRF 314.94A7 and in the guidance. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Forsyth. We have another question for you. The SAEs from the reference treatment arm must be reported to FDA. Is that correct? If so, who takes the submission responsibility and how do we avoid duplication of cases?
Yes, absolutely. Serious adverse events from the reference treatment arm must be submitted as well. You must report all SAEs regardless of whether they are in the reference, the test, or the placebo arm. So the applicant should take full responsibility for serious adverse event reporting and have a good communication process in place with investigators and clinical sites to report the SAEs in a timely manner to FDA. Thank you.
Great, thank you for answering. We have a question now for Debra Catterson. So Debra, are these SAE reporting requirements the same for ANDA and Bio-IND studies?
So that is an excellent question. Thank you for that. And the short answer is no, they're not the same. And so I'll explain why they're different. So as you know, the vast majority of generic products do meet the requirements for IND exemption. So that means that you can conduct a bioequivalence study, bioavailability study, and you don't have to conduct it under an IND. For those particular situations, we call them IND exempt BABE studies. And these have been the focus of Dr. Forsyth's presentation that she just completed. The SAE reporting requirements, as Dr. Forsyth mentioned, you have to submit all SAEs to the FDA, regardless of causality, except for foreign studies. And then all adverse events would need to be submitted to the ANDA submission when you finally get ready to send everything to the FDA with your ANDA submission. So how does that differ from bio-INDs? Well, a bio-IND is for those generic products that don't meet the requirements for IND exemption. And why might that be? Well, it could be a cytotoxic drug, a radioactively labeled drug product. And so in those situations, when you have those types of drugs, bioequivalence IND is required. And that's to ensure that the proposed drug products are safe for use in human test subjects, and they don't expose these subjects to undue risk. And so a bio-IND is just like a regular IND, the type of IND that you would submit to the Office of New Drugs. So therefore, if bio-INDs are just like other INDs, that means you have to follow the safety reporting requirements according to the regs. And I believe it's 21 CFR Part 312. If you want to find out what are the reporting requirements for INDs, go to Part 312 and you'll find it. And the other thing I'd like to add is that OGD, Office of Generic Drugs, has published a manual of policies and procedures on how OGD reviews bio-INDs. So if you'd like to check that out, you can just Google it and find our, we call it MAP, Manual of Policies and Procedures, to learn more about how we review bio-INDs.
Okay, great. Thank you, Deborah, for that excellent explanation. And next up, we have a question for Lauren. Lauren, if the reference listed drug is discontinued, can the FDA ask the generic company to provide a REMS?
Thank you for the question. Yes, if the RLD was subject to a REMS but then withdrawn, the ANDA would still be subject to the REMS requirements to ensure that the benefits of the drug outweigh the risks. And those requirements would be detailed in the RNL that's sent to the ANDA holder once it is submitted. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. We have another question for you. If the ANDA sponsor is not working with the NDA holder, how do they know what is in the ETASU to ensure it is comparable?
The REMS documents are publicly available on the REMS at FDA website for all approved REMS. The supporting documents, which describe in more detail how the ETASU elements are implemented, are not publicly available, but which can present a challenge in trying to kind of copy the RLD's program. But the details of implementation can differ somewhat as long as they meet the same REMS requirements.
Great, thank you, Lauren. And our next question is for Dr. Ron. And the question is, would a container or closure change what would it be categorized under?
Thank you for the question. The reporting category for the for container closure system changes depends on the nature of the change. So one of the best references that I can give you is changes to an approved NDA or ANDA guidance, which talks about various changes to container closure systems in addition to other changes. So that's a very good starting point. You should also refer to the newly published guidance, which is titled COVID-19 component changes. So these are for changes in glass vials and stoppers. So I would recommend you to refer to that guidance too, because that guidance talks about the reporting categories, and it also talks about the supporting data that is needed for the change. So to keep the answer short, the reporting category depends on the nature of the change, and it could vary from annual reportable to CBE to PAS, depending on the nature and risk of the change, and you can refer to the existing guidances.
Thank you, Dr. Ron. We have another question for you. A company submitted a CBE 30 to change an analytical testing lab for an excipient in September 2020. They've not received approval yet. Can they implement the change?
Can you repeat the question? I missed the first half. I'm sorry.
Sure. A company submitted a CBE 30 to change an analytical testing lab for an excipient in September 2020, and they've not received an approval yet. Can they implement the change?
All right, thank you for repeating the question, and it's a very good question. So if you submitted it as a CBE 30, and if you haven't heard otherwise from the agency, like for example, if you haven't heard from the agency that the change has been denied to a PAS, or if you haven't heard any contrary information from the agency, you can go ahead, and you should go ahead and implement your change 30 days after submitting the supplement. So basically 30 days after supplement receipt at the FDA. You do not need to wait for the approval letter to implement a change for a CBE supplement. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We have another question for you. And an applicant wishes to add a DS manufacturer. Based on a risk assessment, it has been concluded that the DS impurity profile will remain the same, and there's no impact on the properties, neither impact with DP quality, safety, and performance. Under this circumstance, is it possible to submit a PA CMP in order to reduce the CBE 30 submission? Or by default, should it always be considered as a PAS submission?
Thank you for that question. That's a very good question. A new API supplier or a new API source should be submitted as a PAS. One exception would be that if the same applicant has already been approved for the same API source as a PAS, then in order to use the same drug substance from the same API source in a different drug product, then you can submit that as a CBE 30. But in order to do so, you need to be first approved for that specific drug substance API source as a PAS first. And if that's done, once that's done, that shows that you have experience with the drug substance, and subsequent supplements for the same change can be a CBE 30. But when you do so, make sure to write in the cover letter for the CBE 30 supplement that you have already been approved as a PAS for the same API source change, and cite the supplement number and the ANDA number or the NDA number where it was previously approved.
Great, thank you. We have an additional question for you. Currently, for site transfer supplement, the understanding is that one batch requirement with 3 months data is sufficient. Does this approach hold, and is that good for semi-solid products, for example, cream or ointments?
Generally speaking, yes. The best source, the best guidance to follow for post-approval changes to semi-solids is the SUPAC SS guidance, and that talks about the various reporting categories and the recommended supporting data. So, so generally speaking, to answer your question, one batch with 3 months accelerated data is sufficient as per SUPAC SS.
Great answer, thank you. We have another question for you, Dr. Ron. If the ANDA exhibit batches, 3 batches, were manufactured at production scale, can the expiry be extended based on real-time stability data generated on these batches, for example, 36 months?
Excellent question. I would refer you to the CMC annual reportable changes guidance in order to respond to your question. So this, I believe, was published in March 2014. And that guidance states that extensions of expiry is an annual reportable change. The key point here is that the extension should be based on at least 3 discrete batches. So if the batches come from a common blend, so if the 3 batches come from a common blend, you would not call them 3 discrete batches. But as long as they come, as long as the data comes from 3 discrete batches, that data can be used for extension of expiry. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ron. We have another question for you. Can changes in impurities, for example, a relaxing of a limit or including new impurities, be made to comply with an update in the monograph? Should that be submitted via CBE 30?
Yes. So if for example you're widening a specified impurity limit to comply with the USP, then that change is a CBE 30 change, as long as it's made to comply with the USP monograph. Thank you.
Thank you. We have another question for you, Dr. Ron. For additional strength PAS, is one batch with 3 months ACC sufficient for submission?
So at this time, one batch with 3 months accelerated and long-term data is sufficient to support a new strength PAS. However, if in the future the guidance changes or if the requirements change, then we'll have to comply with the new requirements. But at this point in time, we do follow one batch and 3 months accelerated and long-term stability data for a new strength PAS.
Great, thank you. And we have another question for you, Dr. Ron. Does the type of operation in the SUPAC guidances refer to the facility's profile class code of the facility that the operation is being transferred to?
Yes. So the type of operation, when referred to in the guidance, refers to the profile class code. And if you need a further, more detailed description, near the end of the changes to an approved NDA and ANDA guidance, there's a whole discussion on what type of operation means. So this is the guidance that was published in 2004, the April 2004 guidance. So definitely refer to that guidance, and that guidance talks in a great detail about what type of operation means. And you are right that it does refer to the profile class code. So like, for example, the type of operation would be different for manufacturing an immediate release tablet versus for manufacturing an extended release or a modified release tablet. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And with that, we are going to circle back to Dr. Chazin. So, Dr. Chazin, how realistic is it to provide post-approval surveillance for generic products? There are so many generics. How could you focus on the ones that are most important?
Hi, yes, it's a really great question. Sorry, I have a dog barking in the background, but the way we focus our generic drugs is to try to take a sort of a balanced approach. You know, there are thousands of drugs marketed and there are thousands of safety reports. So we try to take a sort of educated approach. We have pharmacovigilance screening that we perform each month using databases that are readily available. And then we also use marketing databases that are also have some proprietary drug marketing information. With that, we try to have a way of focusing on sort of a complaint threshold, I'll call it, an ability for the number of complaints to reach a certain threshold over time before we start an investigation. That way we don't waste our time on just spurious reports that may occur and then go away. We look for trends in the data first before we start asking for more information to address safety concerns or potential safety concerns. Thank you.
Great. And Dr. Chazin, this question is also for you. Can you comment on why generic drugs are so much cheaper, and are they of lesser quality?
Sorry about that. Yeah, so you know, the reason why generic drug prices are lower is because of competition. So there's nothing different about we do quality evaluations, bioequivalence reviews, and make sure that generic drugs are safe and effective as their brand counterparts. What you see in the marketplace that happens is more generic drugs are approved, the brand and the generics are on the market at the same time, and the price starts to decrease, which is great for the American public. But just because the drug price is less than the brand doesn't mean there's any difference in the quality of the product. And I think that's what's confusing for people. They don't understand how a drug could be very expensive and then a year or two later reduce in price significantly. And that's, again, because of drug competition and the success of the generic drug program.
Great, thank you. And our next question is for Debra Catterson. Is there someone that a company can contact if they have additional questions concerning the safety reporting requirements for IND exempt bioavailability and bioequivalence studies?
Yes, there is. So the Office of Generic Drugs had set up a special mailbox to receive all of the serious adverse event submissions to be in accordance with the safety reporting requirements. But that mailbox is also the best place to send any questions you might have concerning the requirements or anything related to this. Feel free to send any queries you have to that mailbox, and that was included in one of Dr. Forsyth's slides. It's OGD premarket safety reports at fda.hhs.gov. And this is a mailbox that is monitored by a safety coordinator during normal business hours. So it's we have somebody that is watching it and can respond to your query during the 8 to 4:30, the regular business hours. Somebody will get back to you. So feel free to send any queries you have to that mailbox.
Great, thank you, Deborah. We have another question for you. Does FDA expect to receive all serious adverse events, even if the person conducting the study does not think that the events are drug-related at all?
Yes, that is a common question that one might have, because let's say you have a situation where you have a subject enrolled in a BE study, and maybe they're in a car accident or something else happens that you would say, well, that's not really related to the study that they're in, but FDA wants to receive all serious adverse events. Okay, so the rule is very clear. Just send it to us. Don't even think about causality. We want to get them all, no matter what happened. If it's a serious adverse event, send it to us, and you'll be golden.
Great, thank you for that insight and for joining the panel. Our next question is for Dr. Forsyth. Dr. Forsyth, if the serious adverse event is listed in the references approved label, must it be reported to FDA?
Yes, even if the serious adverse event is a known adverse event for the drug and it's in the label, it still must be reported. We want to receive all of the SAEs. The same goes for whether someone has an underlying condition, it's known, or an accident. We want to receive all of them. So please send them to us. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Our next question is for Lauren. Lauren, what are some of the issues that typically arise during a shared system REMS development?
Some of the following issues are addressed during negotiations and can also present unique challenges, such as cost sharing, confidentiality, product liability concerns, antitrust concerns, access to license for elements to protect the patent, and experience and trust gaps can be issues as well.
Okay, great, thank you. And as a follow-up, can you comment on some of the benefits of a single shared system REMS?
For shared system REMS, these fulfill congressional intent to reduce end-user burden and foster ease of access to the generic products with REMS. They help to reduce burden for different stakeholders. They provide a single portal to access materials and other documentations and information about the programs. And finally, there's the potential for cost sharing among all the sponsors. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And the last two questions will go to Dr. Ron. What are the FDA review timeframes for a CBE 0, CBE 30, and a PAS?
Thank you for that question. So first, let me start with PASs. So for PASs, the GDUFA goal date is either 6 months or 4 months, depending upon whether priority review was granted or not. For standard PASs, most GDUFA goal dates are 6 months if a pre-approval inspection is not required. And for drug shortage supplements where priority review was granted, the GDUFA goal date will reduce to 4 months if no pre-approval inspection is required. Currently, there are no GDUFA goal dates for CBE 0s and CBE 30s. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. And for our last question of the day and our last question of the conference, this is sadly the last one we have time for, but this question again is for Dr. Ron. For alternate drug substance manufacturing, if the drug substance manufacturer is supplying the material to another organization, and we can get the compliance information from, they can only get the compliance information from the drug substance manufacturing, can they submit the change as a CB30?
No. The alternate API source change in this specific instance would be a PAS. It would be a prior approval supplement and not a CBE30. Thank you very much for the question. I think that's an excellent question.
Great, fantastic. Thank you to the person who asked it, and thank you to all of our attendees for sticking around for the end. We